C is for cup. C is for cat. Comfort. Cozy. C is for camera. C is for clouds. C is for the C tag, new and improved. An original tag created by Jim at the channel Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. I was kindly tagged by Kim from the wonderful channel An Oasis of Books. A link to both channels in the description below, as well as providing links to both Jim and Kim's respective versions of the tag, which are both very much worth your time. So, without much further ado, let's begin. Prompt 1. C is for countries. What was the last book you read by an author from a country beginning with C? Or a book set in a country beginning with C? One book I recently finished was the 1981 novella Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel García Márquez. García Márquez is a Colombian author, and the book in question is loosely inspired by a real-life murder which took place in Sucre, in Colombia, in 1951. Chronicle of a Death Foretold has been described as a combination of journalism, realism, and detective story. And while the book isn't as outwardly surreal as the author's earlier, more expansive works, such as the epic family saga 100 Years of Solitude from 1967, the book in question does contain a few faint traces of the more characteristic magical realism that García Márquez is known for, particularly a sense of something almost supernatural in the various harbingers and premonitions that haunt the characters and their recollections of the death itself. Prompt 2. C is for classic. What was the last classic book you read? I had to rack my brain for this one, as I don't think I've read any literary classics this year. I've had to go all the way back to September 2024, when I read the 1913 novel Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. This is another expansive family saga, though one very different in tone to the aforementioned work of Gabriel García Márquez. Lawrence's earthy realism and gritty focus on the conflicts between generations of a working-class family are in stark contrast with the magical realism of 100 Years of Solitude. Yet both books are expansive, immersive, and contain personal, autobiographical elements for their respective authors. The depressing tone of the book, and Lawrence's decision to write the dialogue in the broad regional accent of his East Midlands setting, was certainly challenging. But as a literary device, the text does achieve a kind of stark lyricism, and is in keeping with the generally uncompromising style of Lawrence's work. Prompt 3. C is for children's books. What was the last children's book you read for your own enjoyment? The last children's book I read was The Woodcutter's Duck by Krystyna Turska. Turska is one of my favourite illustrators, and I've been trying to find an affordable copy of one of her books for a long time. I was really after a copy of her book Tamara and the Sea Witch, but that's a book that isn't so easy to find in an affordable condition. When I saw a copy of The Woodcutter's Duck on Etsy a couple of months ago, I snapped it up. Once again, the illustrations in the book are wonderful. However, I found myself genuinely engrossed and transported by this story of a young man who just wants to enjoy a quiet life with his pet duck. The book's themes of standing up and fighting back against unjust authority figures, personal integrity, and the idea that goodness provides its own rewards are obviously idealistic, but do set a good example for young readers. Prompt 4. C is for cookbook. Do you have a favourite? The short answer to this one is no. Sadly, I don't have much time or patience when it comes to cooking. I do manage to keep myself relatively well fed on a basic level, but the culture of cooking as its own kind of art form is one that's generally lost on me. Instead, I'll use this as an opportunity to further promote Kim's video, which is a veritable treasure trove of cookbook recommendations. Perfect viewing for any Booktube foodies out there. Prompt 5. C is for comfort zone. What genres fall into your reading comfort zone? I don't feel like I have a comfort zone when it comes to genres, or even in terms of reading in general. I think I'm someone who generally likes to challenge myself as a reader, and because of this I do tend to seek out challenging books and authors. I also like to discover new authors and subgenres, so I think reading might be the one aspect of my life where I don't immediately retreat to a kind of comfort zone. As an aside, my partner recently bought me the complete box set of the TV series Columbo. Having been a fan of Columbo since childhood, this is definitely comfort viewing for me. And of course, C is for Columbo. Prompt 6. C is for characters you can't forget. What fictional characters live rent-free in your head? I've mentioned this character a couple of times on the channel, but this feels like another opportunity to promote Inside Mr. Enderby by Anthony Burgess. The main character, Francis Xavier Enderby, is a cantankerous poet who lives on the top floor of a rundown guest house. Due to a nervous stomach, he spends most of his time writing poetry while sat on the toilet, the gurgles and grunts of his ailing digestive system providing an internal symphony. I describe the book as a tragic comic masterpiece, and for me arguably the greatest book of Burgess's that I've read so far. Enderby feels like the blueprint for every classic British sitcom character that we've seen since, from Reginald Perrin and Basil Fawlty, to Alan Partridge and David Brent. He has that same combination of arrogance and vulnerability, his narcissism and lack of self-awareness, pushing him constantly towards disaster and self-destruction. He's a sympathetic character that we nonetheless struggle to sympathise with, due to his innate ability to use up any modicum of goodwill that he's afforded. Throughout the book, he unfailingly self-sabotages every opportunity he's presented with. The scene where he's given a prestigious award and ends up using the opportunity to bitterly admonish his competition is laugh-out-loud funny, but it also underpins the deeper psychological scars of the character, and how his inability or unwillingness to conform or to fit in with societal expectations ultimately comes from a place of both self-harm and self-preservation. Prompt 7. C is for crime. What was the last crime novel you read? The last crime novel I read was Doll's Eyes by Barry Wood. This is the story of a clairvoyant who develops an almost symbiotic attachment to an emotionless serial killer. The cat and mouse relationship between these two protagonists providing suspense, but also something eventually more cathartic on the theme of trauma. Published in 1993, the influence of Thomas Harris and his Hannibal Lecter books hangs very heavily over the mood and general machinations of Wood's work. But the book also feels somewhat predictive, or at least analogous to that other 1990s amalgam of investigative procedural and the supernatural, The X-Files, which debuted in the same year. I was curious to read this primarily because I was familiar with its 1999 film adaptation by Neil Jordan, there retitled In Dreams. Oddly, the two works have hardly anything in common beyond the basic premise of a woman with psychic abilities having visions of a dangerous killer. In fact, I was genuinely surprised they even bothered to credit the book at all. Jordan's film barely functions as an adaptation, and instead uses the premise of the book to spin an almost entirely original story. Nonetheless, I thought this was an interesting book with a novel premise, pitting one character incapable of feeling against another character who feels too deeply. The book gets off to a strong start and features some very disturbing and tense set pieces. However, it did test my patience a little around the halfway mark. I found the detective character rather bland, and too often a distraction from the more interesting story of the psychic and the exploration of her abilities and family history. Prompt 8. C is for ChatGPT and Claude AI. Ask ChatGPT or another AI to choose a book for you. How close was it to choosing a good book for your tastes? I'm not going to beleaguer this video with my thoughts on generative AI. Several channels that I watch and enjoy have used AI, and often to creative effect. However, it's not something I have any interest in exploring. Instead of generative AI, I'd much rather talk about Steven Spielberg's underrated masterpiece, AI Artificial Intelligence from 2001, one of the esteemed director's most powerful works. Instead of Claude AI, I'd rather talk about Claude Chabrol, the unsung master of the French New Wave, and specifically his incendiary 1995 Ruth Rendell adaptation, La Cérémonie, because C is for ceremony, and C is for Claude Chabrol. The final prompt, as ever, is to tag others. Having uploaded another tag video very recently, I don't think I'll tag anyone directly in this video. That said, if this is a tag you would like to take part in, then consider this an informal tag to anyone who might be watching. If you do decide to take part, then do remember to tag me in your video so I can give it a watch and a like. If you don't want to make a video, but you still have some thoughts on any of the prompts included in this tag, then please feel free to leave a response in the comments below. Likewise, if you have any thoughts or recommendations based on any of the books featured in this video, then I'd love to hear from you. As ever, thanks for watching.